So we've kind of talked about this, kind of running at different levels and things like that. Yeah?
Go back to those slides.
Sure.
I guess the bullets on the first half right there, are they all written or registered in the registry somehow, somewhere? All of them?
No, so registry auto runs obviously are written in the registry, right? Scheduled tasks are separate. They're actual, they're files that are like managed by the Windows Task Scheduler. So they're separate.
Files.
They're files on the file system, yep. Browser helper objects are kind of what we talked about yesterday. They're actually loaded into the web browser. For lack of a better, they're like plugins basically. So they allow for like Adobe uses a browser helper object for rendering PDFs inside of the web browser, right? It's similar to something, but they're files. They're like a DLL or ActiveX control or something like that. DLL search order hijacking or DLL injection requires either modification of a DLL or a new DLL to be added to the system, right? So it requires a file in the system, obviously. And Windows services will be found in the registry as well, but they're going to be like executables on the system too.
When all of the DLL loaded in the Windows System 32 area, are they considered to be all kernel DLL?
No. No, it depends. So they're not loaded all the time. They're loaded when they're needed to for certain applications. Like kernel 32 DLL is loaded. It has to be loaded, right? I mean, it's like by every process it's going to be referenced, right? Because that's basically handling all like kind of the like create process, access process, things like that. It's all going to be handled by kernel 32 DLL. So basically every application needs to reference that. But other applications will only reference the DLLs that they need to, right? To do their functionality. So there's some that will be consistent across various applications.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about the, user level and kernel level? Right?
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, so this kind of gets into, so we've kind of talked about this a little bit. We talked about rootkits, right? And I think I asked you probably a while back what this isn't directly answering the question that you had, but I think that it'll kind of somewhat explain it. We talked about kind of the user level and kernel level, right? Those are basically the two types of rootkits, right? So a user level runs at that user, at the user kind of interface level, right? So that's why like when I run something like task list, and I don't see whatever it was, SVC manager or systab or something like that, I don't see it in task list. That is basically hiding it from a user perspective, right? Now, a kernel perspective is a little bit higher than that, right? It's basically hiding it from everybody. It's hiding it from, from kind of individual calls from the operating system itself, not necessarily just from that user-specific calls. And those are basically kind of running with, for like they're higher up. They're just like, they have more kind of, they can hide more, and they can kind of, they're almost embedding them. I'm using kind of higher and lower at the same time, but they kind of have embedded themselves deeper than the user level rootkits have, right? Because they can kind of interrupt any call. They can hook any processing that the kernel is actually conducting on the operating system, right? Which means that they can hide it from the entire operating system itself, not just necessarily the user, right? And this is where it kind of gets interesting when you're dealing with things like memory analysis, right? Is that when you have, you remember how we had PS list and PS scan? Remember how we had those two things? I kind of told you the two approaches that they take. We also have task list too, which is kind of another, kind of separate from memory analysis, but kind of complements those. So when I ran task list and I didn't see SVC or systab or whatever, but then you look in PS list and you see it, right? Now you may not know this, but that is indicative of a user mode rootkit, because when I run task list, I'm logged into my system and I run task list at the command line. I'm a user on that computer. Task list is running as whatever I've opened that shell as, right? And it's giving the response back to me, the user, of here's the output, right? If I see the output in PS list, that means that the kernel isn't being that the kernel can still see those values, right? Because the memory structure is basically telling us. It's just walking down the list, right, saying here are process entries, right? So when I run task lists, the rendering that's given to me on the screen and in my output is basically being restricted based on my user level that I'm running as. If it was a kernel mode rootkit, you wouldn't see those entries in task list or PS list, right? Because now PS list is just walking down the list and saying, show me the entries. If it's kernel mode rootkit and it's basically saying, don't show me this process, then the kernel's not going to even know it's there. It's not going to be able to walk down the list to see it. Does that make sense? But when you run PS scan, you will be able to see that entry, right? I kind of pretty sure talked about this more when we were talking about memory analysis. But PS scan will look for the signature for the process somewhere in memory, and it will be able to tell you. So when you see those different levels, kind of changes between them, that can kind of give you an indication of what level they're running at as far as the rootkit goes.
I guess when let's say I'm creating a DLL, some DLL is run at kernel mode, some DLL is actually run at the user mode right there. What, I guess, make them go from one?
Okay, well, let's talk about it in processes in general, right? So this kind of comes back to the previous slides that we were talking about, kind of where they're actually going to be executed and things like that. So like some applications will only be run when a user logs in or when a user executes a process or something like that, right? And that will be kind of based on a user action, as opposed to things like whether they be auto-run values or scheduled tasks or whatever that are going to be on a system level that will run basically any time, no matter who is logged in or if anyone is logged in, right? As long as the system is on, type of thing. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, good.
Could I ask something regarding
Sure.
the network thingy? If there's a network share, would user rootkit be able to touch it, read it, and manipulate it?
Both the user and the kernel mode rootkit would be able to. So what rootkits are basically doing, right, is that they are. So when you want to access something on the system, you say, like, show me this file, right? What user mode rootkits do is that they interrupt the operating system's communication between you and the actual file system itself. So they're basically saying, like, don't show that file, right? We've basically made it so you can't see it. So the real benefit of user mode is that the real benefit of a rootkit is that it benefits or it prevents the user from actually seeing content on the system, right? The attacker is using it to basically hide themselves being there. It's a method of hiding themselves. So user mode is basically hiding it from the user. Kernel mode is hiding it from everything, hiding it from the system itself.